Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Jane Bischoff, and I work at the Department of Public Instruction on the special ed team, but I work across a lot of different teams and divisions on universal design for learning. And I help school districts, educators, and CISAs and IHE people from higher ed to really understand learning and universal design of environments and experiences as a form of operationalizing our equity vision in Wisconsin. And I'm joined here with Stacy.
Hi, everyone. Welcome again to our first AIM webinar in our series. We are very excited that you are here to join us. Happy to recognize some of our AT Forward Community of Practice members I'm seeing that have joined. So welcome. Again, I am Stacy Duffy, and I am the director of the Wisconsin AIM Center. In addition to that role, I work for CISA 2 as an educational consultant and the transition specialist. I also manage the AT Forward project with Kathy White, who is also on here as our host. Hi, Kathy. And she will be helping us out this evening as we monitor the chat, ask questions if you need. Again, we're going to utilize that chat for those questions, and we'll pause for throughout the presentation to get those answered, and we'll certainly have time at the end of the presentation for additional questions as they arise. So again, welcome, and I'll turn it back over to Jane.
All right. Well, you are at the right place if you intended on landing at the Accessible Educational Materials, or AIM, in Wisconsin. Are you ready? Presentation tonight. And this is part of part of four presentations, live webinars that are going to really roll out the why, what, and how of accessible educational materials as required under IDEA for students with IEPs, and just how to understand that, what kind of perspective and attitude to have around meeting the needs of learners, as well as the technical pieces of how you acquire, request, and use materials with students, their families, and in instruction. In addition to the series of webinars, which will be recorded and the slides made available on the AT Forward website, we're also going to have a guidance document that really extends and supports what these webinars are going to be covering. So more details, more embedded resources that can kind of support the implementation pieces of AIM. And then we have two active centers in Wisconsin that are technical assistance for AIM, meeting the needs of students, and the Wisconsin AIM Center, which Stacy Duffy is the director for, as well as the Wisconsin Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired. So you are here, November 30th. Are you ready? And we're going to cover today an overview of AIM and include the legal requirements found in IDEA, as well as an intentional decision-making tool that we've created for IEP teams to use regarding determining the need for AIM and making that decision and documenting it on the IEP. And then we're going to also just go over some of the AIM resources I mentioned that will extend and support implementation teams, as well as highlight what's coming next in the next webinar, and have you have access to registration for those as well. So for yourselves for today, we've designed the presentation for your learning, and your goal as a learner today is to leave the presentation having had an experience where you feel as though you can determine the need for AIM. You're here for your own reason with your own questions. And if you'd like to put what your personally relevant goal is for being here today that would support your learning and being able to determine the need for AIM, or any questions that you have, we really encourage you to either write them down, think about them, and if you want to put them in the chat, and we can elevate some of that as we go through as either affirming that we're covering it or address any low-hanging fruit that we find from your remarks that you enter into the chat or that you ask during some Q&A opportunities. So I just want to be clear that there is a goal for you as a learner. So as we begin an overview of AIM, this is not necessarily something new. It is not new, but it is something that we're finding nationally that a lot of educators, because of staff turnover, aren't really aware of the technical pieces of the requirements for AIM and really how it really matters in the life of students having equitable opportunities for learning experiences that manifest success for them. So I'm going to propose to you that this text on this slide is your material for this chunk of the presentation to read, so that as we move ahead into the next few slides, you can understand a little bit of the context for what we're talking about AIM. So if you just take a moment and read this excerpt with the goal to create some background information context for the presentation, that would be great. By now, you probably all think I've lost my marbles, but I actually haven't. That blurry text is the experience that many of our learners have, whether or not it's blurry or whether or not it is distracted by other visuals or whatever the issue is. We kind of like to reference this as the print is disabling. The medium is disabling. It's not the student who's disabled, but the text manifests almost like an allergy for that student. And the reaction is they can't access it. And if they can't access it, there's not a chance they're going to be able to use it. And if they can't use it, there's not a chance that they're going to be able to comprehend it. So if the goal for the purpose of the material is, according to this academic standard in reading, speaking and listening, first standard, first grade, and there's this standard in a derivative all the way through high school, to prepare for classroom discussion, that's the purpose. The educator is designing the experience for learners with this text. The question becomes, preparing for a classroom discussion when decoding is not the goal, can the learner access the content in a format different than just printed text or standard text? In order for our learners to have mastery in the act of learning, we want them to have as many opportunities in school to practice becoming knowledgeable and being resourceful, becoming more strategic and goal-directed in their learning, and maintaining and regulating purpose and motivation for learning. And these are three things that the brain continually seeks in every human being. And so these three brain networks that are here by lightning bolts are the three brain networks that really the Universal Design for Learning framework is based on. And the goal of UDL is to become expert at learning itself. We all know from our COVID experiences, we had to learn a lot of things and meet a lot of challenges. And we had to learn. We had to learn, and many of us did that for long hours and in many different ways. And some of it was very hard and challenging. But we did use materials in new ways. We did understand that having flexibility in our instruction was not only good, it was required. It was essential for learners to experience high levels of learning and engagement, to be flexible. So what we're talking about with text-based educational materials as really being a barrier for learning, and it refers to materials that have static or fixed text and images, such as your textbooks and any supplemental text materials. I'm thinking about driver's ed materials, handouts that are used, websites that are used, tests, syllabi, rubrics, parent newsletters. Text-based materials can be an electronic textbook. Let's say your publisher of your social studies textbook has an electronic textbook that replicates the standard print of the textbook. And text-based materials also include visuals and graphics. That would be considered text. And this is taken right out of our academic standards in Wisconsin. So what are accessible educational materials? Well, the National AEM Center defines accessible education materials as print and technology-based educational materials, included printed and electronic textbooks and related core materials that are designed or enhanced in a way that makes them usable across the widest range of learner variability, regardless of the format. So they are intentionally designed or enhanced in a way that makes them usable across the widest range of learner variability, which means the variability of learners to engage, to comprehend, and to communicate. And we know that the flexibility in using technology really helps with reaching a wide range of learner variability, but it is not required. Digital does not mean accessible. So just because there's something digital does not necessarily make it accessible. Text-based digital materials are not consistently designed for use with assistive technology. Some learners use AT to read and navigate text and images in digital materials. Screen readers, text-to-speech, and switches are a few examples of AT devices and software. So there's a whole package here. There's actually, the material itself, the format it's in, and then the features of those formats that in many cases, just like on our phones, we can turn on and off. We want materials to be accessible and usable so that they are a benefit. When you think of software developers, they have an eye on the user and the user experience, or UX. The accessible format is an inclusive and functional term that focuses on the experience of the user. So AIM is really having us pivot intentionally and overtly on the experience of the user with the material. Accessible versions of educational materials may mean the difference between learning barriers and learning opportunities, and in fact, it does. Universally designed learning experiences and materials mean materials serve learners who vary, who are not just the average fourth grader or just aren't, have a label of some sort that we like to do in education. They serve learners who vary in accessible and usable formats with features that are beneficial for each person. And many times that has to be, evaluated and practiced and tried out to see what are those features and what kinds of formats work best, given the academic or instructional goal for the learner, as well as what the material is itself and what's going to be done with what's garnered from the material. Available to all, but it's required for students with IEPs where it's documented in the IEP. Many of these features I'm talking about, for example, changing the font size, or we'll go over a few more examples, or making the font bigger, adding light to the background like we do in our phone, or dimming the light. For some people that's required based on their disability related need, but even people that are not identified as having that as a disability related need, it's still beneficial to them. It's just like in the physical environment where there's a curb cut or a ramp is required for some, but many of us use them and benefit from them as well to meet our goals. So the goal for Universal Design for Learning, as I mentioned, is to develop expert learners. And the Universal Design for Learning framework starts with a way to think about learning and learners, putting the learner at the center of the design and considering everything in the environment and the context that adults in the system have responsibility for that may be barriers to that learner fully engaging with the learning experience. And then that's on us. The burden of change then is on us first and foremost. So some of the formats that we're familiar with are talking books, using video, braille, and large print, and some of the accessibility features, and many of them are on our phones or on other sources of media. We can change the speed, we can close caption, navigation features, we can choose the background and font, enlarge or reduce. Some text readers have highlighting as you go, or they gray out the line above and beyond, below for easeability. Volume adjustment, of course, and embedded supports like an embedded coach on, help with what to do, and glossaries, note-taking, and embedded videos. So with accessible educational materials, when we're using them, we consider what formats and what accessibility features are necessary for students' particular disability-related need, given the learning context and goal of the instruction, because that may vary. The universality of one size fits all, like always speech to text or text to speech or always something, isn't necessarily the I in an IEP, the individualized. AIM is in the law, and it is a required consideration, and it is required to be considered by an IEP team. So we have capital AEM, where I'm kind of formalizing accessible educational materials according to IDEA. But I also want to point out that small AEM, accessible educational materials, is simply the matter of giving students what they need when they need it. And we often hear it's not fair to have some kids listening to having earbuds in their ears, or it's not fair for some kids to be able to watch a video to get the background knowledge. That would be like saying it's not fair for me to have contact lenses in right now. I need to have contact lenses. And the fact is that we need to be preparing our students for a life outside of having a paraprofessional read to them, or only listening to text, if they can interact with what they're listening to and have some control over stopping and starting and other features of listening. So AIM, all caps, means there are statutory obligations for educators and IEP teams. And it's also a function of a federal protection for publishers' copyrighted materials. So currently, there are copyrighted materials that are protected by federal law that they don't just make available en masse for everybody to use all at one time in any format, because the publishers want to recoup the costs of creating those materials. And so there's a process for IEP teams and educators who identify the need for AIM to document it and get access in the request and acquiring of the material in order to use it, that is aligned with what the publishers have lobbied for and required. But we have to remember capital AIM and small AIM are really both necessary to be considering here. So we'll be talking about the criteria that you will use to request materials from particular producers who are authorized to give out materials and have you be able to use them with students identified for having a need for AIM. And then we'll also be talking about these producers that actually create and manage some of the versions of materials like Braille and things like that, and how those are provided to educators in a formal kind of way, in addition to what you might be doing with your other platforms that have the ability to make text more accessible in your local context or what you create, and may even create to be born accessible. So the next chunk that we're going to lean into is a little bit more about the legal requirements, and then we've created a resource that supports the intentional decision-making process of IEP teams to formally decide yes or no if students have a need for AIM. And then we'll be talking again about some additional AIM resources to assist IEP teams. And this is just one of 4 webinars with those other materials and other things being offered to you.